The following is a conversation with Dai Manuel. Dai Manuel is a native of Vancouver, Canada, and is a former executive of a multi-million-dollar retail company. He is a sought-after lifestyle mentor and executive leadership coach and preaches the power of vulnerability, as mentioned in his TED Talk. Here's his story. So, Dai, I listened to your TED Talk recently, and one thing that really stood out to me is something that you described happened on January 1st, 2010. Can you briefly walk us through that morning?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, going back, way back, right? It was quite the morning. I had come home the night before, quite inebriated. But most people would think, yeah, it's end of year. That's pretty much par for the course for a lot of people. You sort of let your hair down, as they say, and you let things rip end of year to celebrate a new year coming to fruition. And unfortunately, it was just par for the course for me. It was kind of me at my rock bottom, so to speak, because I was slowly regressing to a place that I wasn't happy about. But it's really interesting when you find yourself in the hole sometimes and feeling low and just depressed, unsure of what direction you're going in life, and unsure of what are you after and why are you going after it. Really disillusioned. And I distracted myself with alcohol. And that morning I got home. I still, and Daniel, I'm embarrassed to mention this, but I have no idea how I got home that night. But I did. I made it home. And the next morning I wake up face down on the Berber carpet beside our bed. So I at least made it to the bedroom, up a couple flights of stairs, and but didn't quite make it into the bed. And I passed out there, and next morning, and it was actually closer to noon, I finally started to stir, and family was up and downstairs. And long and short of it all, my wife was, let's just say, unloading the dishwasher with extreme passion. I think everybody in our cul-de-sac knew my wife was unloading the dishwasher at that moment. And certainly myself up a flight of stairs could hear it all, and that commotion from the kitchen. And so I made my way down and not feeling great. I mean, obviously I was quite hungover, and made my way to the kitchen. And my wife looked at me, as I turned the corner from the staircase into that kitchen, and there was a look she gave me. Our history at that point in time, we'd been married for 10 years. We had 2 daughters under the age of 6. Quite frankly, from the outside world looking in, everybody thought we had a beautiful life, and we did, I'm not saying that we didn't, but there was a lot of smoke and mirrors, and that was my doing. I was living a double life, so to speak. And she got to a place where she wasn't willing to have it anymore, and sat me down, and we started discussing what life was going to look like to co-parent our kids. And at this time I'm 32 years old. Like, we'd been together since I was early to mid 20s, started having kids fairly young. I'd been building a business and scaling it to 8 figures a year with a business partner and a whole team of people. And I had a lot of things going on. And it's funny, the more busy I got, wearing that big badge of honor, I'm so busy, just ask me how busy I am, right? And it was, a lot of it was just ego and not feeling very fulfilled. And as such, I just distracted myself from really feeling into anything. And alcohol was that perfect escape. And, there was a lot of tears shed. Daniel, we were there looking at each other, and, we both didn't want that. We both loved each other. We loved the life that we were building together, but we realized that there was this impasse that we had come to, and she wasn't willing to negotiate on this. And rightly so. Daniel, like, when I think back on it, the kind of man that I was showing up as, I was modeling and mentoring to those that knew me very well or didn't know me very well, but especially family. I'm modeling to my kids, 2 daughters. This is what a man is. This is what a husband is. This is what a business owner is, a community leader. And I was feeling a lot of guilt and a lot of shame, to be honest with you. And then my wife asked me a question, and this is the question. If there's anything anybody takes away from our conversation today, Daniel, hopefully it's just some form of this question. Because, pardon the pun, but it was the most sobering question I've ever been asked in my life. And my wife looked at me, as we're discussing what life's going to look like to live at separate homes and co-parent our kids, etc. And she says, Dai, I got to ask you, are you being the type of man that you would want your daughters to marry? And I don't know why in that moment, Daniel, honestly, it felt like I got punched in the nose and kicked between the legs at the same time. I was just instantly gutted. and I got super triggered. Okay, like a typical man that identifies as a man, and
Yeah.
just was raised. You know, I'm an '80s kid, and didn't
Traditional.
have a lot of strong male figures around me, and I was just doing what everybody else was doing, and not as an excuse here, but just that's just the way it was. You know, I'm modeling what everybody else was doing around me, and I got really upset, and I really started getting rather antagonistic. And then, you know, I caught myself like, what am I fighting?
Hmm.
This is ridiculous. And that was in that moment, man. I made a commitment to myself, and then really tried to get my kids and my wife on board. Was I was going to go 1 year without drinking.
Hmm.
And I know there's a lot of people that are going to listen or hear this, you know, that are like, wow, only a year. Well, that's not a big deal. I'm like, you have no idea. You know, from age 17 to 32, 15 years of very impactful years of my life, I drank a lot. You
Hmm.
know, I'd worked hard, but I drank harder, you
Hmm.
know, and I was very functioning, you know, and until I couldn't, and I had to make a decision, you know, to say either yes to the life I've always wanted, but that was going to require me to say no to alcohol,
Hmm.
or say yes to alcohol, but then acknowledge and own that this life that I've been working so hard to create, to foster, to really be that type of guy that I always thought I was becoming. And I realized it was all just BS, you know, and
Hmm.
either moving away from that. And so it was a very tough time in my life. But I'll tell you, after saying no, I realized how much help I needed.
Hmm.
You know, after saying, okay, no more of this, I realized I was going to need some support. And that was going to involve a lot of shifts in my beliefs, especially as a man, and especially around mental health.
Hmm.
I'm just being honest. I had a lot of stigmas that I believed to be true, and I had to overcome those, you know?
Yep, totally fair, and awesome that you
Yeah.
were able to get that help. And we could all use definitely a little bit of help in our lives. I'm sure not all of
Yeah.
us, pun intended to what I'm going to mention earlier. Uh, we could all use probably a lot of help being a little more vulnerable and kind of talking
Mm.
about some of the issues that we have. But still returning to that note, do you think you would have been able to make that approach if it wasn't for your wife's help or kind of your wife's push?
Well, I got to be fair. And I think the person that I was at that time, had she continued to enable me to live that lifestyle and that have those habits, you know, our relationship would not have lasted.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? I know that fully. Also, she was just a very, my wife's a very interesting person. You know, she wears
Hmm.
her heart on her sleeve, but she's also a tinge of ginge. You know, that redhead. She's fiery, and she'll be quick to call people out on their own BS. And she was very good at that with me. But you know, there's a certain level of comfort you have in a relationship, especially as you have tenure. You know, like we were there for 10 years and dating for 23 now,
Hmm.
and when you have that level of comfort with people. Like if everyone really thinks about it, it's interesting though. But when we get triggered, we get upset, we get angry, irate, or frustrated. The people that often get the worst of us is the people that we're closest to,
Hmm.
because we have that level of comfort. And but that morning, I really did heed what she had to say. I think it was also because, Daniel, to be fair, it was a bit of a cry for help for me too. You know,
Hmm.
like it was just the writing was on the wall. Pardon the cliche, but there was a lot of signs that I was becoming less and less functioning,
Hmm.
less functional, and there was some kinks in that armor. And I'm very grateful that she asked me that when she did, because had it not happened, you know, in my heart of hearts, I don't know if I'd end up where I am today. Truthfully,
Well, that's
yeah,
an incredible answer, and definitely kudos
yeah,
to her. So,
thanks.
going back to after that day and after you had a serious conversation with your wife,
Mm.
practically, what would you say changed in your approach?
Well, you know, you mentioned the term vulnerability, and I think everything sort of stemmed around that concept, or at least my relationship to that term. And I recognize that, you know, since this moment, I've had a lot of years to really do the inner work, as they say. You know, I was really good at doing professional development. I mean, that was my comfort space. Anything that would develop me professionally and develop that little ego part of my brain of me wanting to be the dude, you know, be the guy that's recognized, be the guy that gets the praise, gets the acknowledgments. I was constantly looking for those kind of affirmations. And a lot of that stemmed from being, as a teenager, I was morbidly obese and very withdrawn and introverted, and just felt like I didn't have a lot of value. So as I started to become healthier and fit, when I made some lifestyle changes, I found myself just constantly seeking approval.
Hmm.
And this is what also led me to alcohol, because I had a lot of hard time becoming more extroverted. And I found that alcohol allowed me that vehicle to start being somebody different and not have any of those little inner voices squawking at me, while I was in those moments. And that's a slippery slope, though, because I started to believe that version of me was the one that people actually liked hanging out with. That was the version of me that people valued. And so you can see where this sort of dilemma is created. And, fast forward during that moment and during that year, I should say, I had to get to a place where I had to get more comfortable with being vulnerable and open, especially with those that I care about and those that care about me. I was very good at, well, let's just say sales, right? I could say the right things at the right times, right? And even though knowing in the back of my mind, I'm just full of it. You know what I mean? Like just looking to try to quell the situation. If my wife's pissed off, she's upset, I just want to calm her down and, move on. Let's get past this, move on, just sort of scrape it under the rug, so to speak. And I had to get really comfortable with my mental health and acknowledging where I was and how I was feeling about myself and really how I saw myself. And that was within the first 6 weeks of saying no to alcohol, because I realized, holy smokes, it was a crutch that was helping me function every day. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm taking the crutch away for a year. Oh man, I've got a bit of a limp here. I think I'm going to have to do something about this. And I remember very clearly, and I people might relate to this story, especially some men that maybe aren't as open to the idea of opening up and talking about our emotions and our thoughts and what we're feeling in certain moments when we're feeling triggered or, anxious. It was about 6 weeks in, and my wife and I are sitting on the couch, and I don't know what came over me, but Daniel, I was just looking at her and I just opened up. I dumped everything on her, like everything that I was feeling inside, everything that I was thinking, and some of the reasons I was believing why I kept sort of regressing to alcohol, so always going back to that comfort place, even though it wasn't serving me, even though it was holding me back, even though it was creating a lot of strife in my relationships, both personally and professionally. It was a comfort zone for me. It was just what I knew, and it provided me instant relief. And I started sharing all this with her and sharing about even my childhood as being that obese kid, being bullied. And that was something I'd kept very quiet. I didn't really talk about it ever. Even in my company, even though it was in the fitness space, I never shared my origin story or the story of being obese until many years after moving away from alcohol, because I used to be ashamed of it. I tried to ignore that part of my story, part of my history.
Yep, totally.
And here I was. I literally dumped on my wife for about a half an hour, 40 minutes. I have no idea how long it was, but she just sat there sort of nodding, touching my lap, and like just really generous and active listening. Right. And at the end of it, I'm like, and, I'm drying some tears around my eyes. And she's like, Dai, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me. It's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And then she said, I think you should talk to somebody, and Dan, you can imagine, and I'm like, whoa, I just talked to you. And, she was absolutely right, though. She can't be my coach. She can't be my therapist, and I know that as a coach myself. I mean, I can't expect my wife to coach me. We're too close, right? People know this, coaching and mentorship. It can't be somebody that, you have romantic relationships with. This period. It doesn't mix. Okay. And so I did. I found a psychologist. I worked with him for maybe 4.5, 5 months. I found a relationships counselor for us to work on our communication. But this is what I mean. I went all in on that inner work, really trying to get clear on me and what do I want? What are my senses of purpose with life, my meaning for my life, and that's the funny thing, right? Like we give our lives meaning. Like if anyone ever asks you the question, what's the meaning of life? Well, it's whatever answer you give it is right. And I had to get to that place, I had to get to that place where I felt comfortable and confident enough, and more importantly, clear on what I was going to start doing to see some of the changes through. And changes are never easy. Let's be fair. It's very challenging. Otherwise, we'd all wake up every morning saying, hey, can I have some more change today? Like we just don't do that. We're rather change averse as a species. And I really came to understand that very much so during that year of stepping away from alcohol. But there is a bright side of this story, and just for anybody that's out there that might be dealing with similar struggles right now, or thinking right now, you're doing that introspection, thinking, man, what maybe what if I just put alcohol in the back burner for a little while? What if I just
Mhm.
said yes to my life and everything that I want and gave it all the attention that it needs? Well, I can honestly tell you, if you do that, good things will happen, and they'll happen very quickly.
Mhm.
Very quickly. When you remove an anchor, it's amazing how free you can start to move. And but the clarity breeds confidence as far as direction's concerned. You do have to have an understanding of having that North Star. Where is it? Where do you want to go? Right? Because without that, I mean, as they say, you could walk any direction and it will do. But at the end of the day, is it going to get you where you want to be? And if you're not clear on what that is, it's really hard to be confident. We're going to procrastinate more. We're going to put things off. We're going to distract ourselves. And
Mhm.
I was very good at distracting myself. So,
I
yeah.
I love
Anyways.
the metaphor that you mentioned there, in the sense that we remove the anchor and then ultimately we see how fast the ship flows, and how you related that to life. The one thing that I wanted to add too, for someone that at some point, by your standard, was overweight, you look great, by the way, for whatever age you are.
Yeah.
So clearly
Thanks.
you're doing something right. Um, the other thing, kind of regarding alcohol, what did you notice changed as you kind of said no to it? Like, what else were you able to see, or what
Yeah.
opportunities were you able to appreciate or open up in your life since kind of moving forward from that substance?
Yeah, and that silver lining I was hinting at is after a year, so much had changed. Like so much had changed in a positive way. That I remember my wife and I looking at each other, and she was just trying to gauge, like, am I going to keep going? Like, what's your plans? Like, are we going to share a glass of wine to celebrate? Because she's like, holy smokes, you did it. And I'm like, holy smokes, I did it. Like we were both rather surprised. It was like a call for celebration. But I remember looking at my wife and being like, Christy, so much has changed. What if I keep going?
Hmm.
What if I keep going? And so it's really developed a lifestyle since then. I have no qualms with alcohol. I can be around it. I have friends that drink. My wife drinks. Like it's not even a thought.
Hmm.
But it's become my new normal, and that's why. But during that year, some of the biggest changes I noticed, especially within the first 8 weeks, was my energy got better, my sleep patterns got better. I wasn't as triggered.
Hmm.
In intense moments. I found myself I was more clear in my thinking processes. But I also, I gained additional resources, especially money, because I wasn't having all that money go out. But also it was the productivity that I gained. It was
Hmm.
crazy. Like I realized that all of a sudden I was gaining back a couple days a week, because those were days I was not very productive after a big drinking binge, right? Like if
Hmm.
I had a big weekend, like a Saturday, Sunday, and this is where it really would go off, was Saturday would be really big. Sunday was our traditional family day, my day to be around the kids and my family. And I would often spend a lot of that in bed or distracted, watching the TV, trying to keep the kids distracted, because I was
Hmm.
hungover. So these are some of those things that all of a sudden you remove the alcohol, all of a sudden I was engaged with my family. We were doing fun stuff on Sundays again. Even my business negotiations now, a supplier comes into town, sure, we go out for dinner. Maybe we go play a round of golf, right? Because a lot of, that cliche that a lot of
That's where
business
the
happens on
business
the
is
golf
done, on the
course.
golf course.
It is true. I didn't believe that until I started golfing, with my
Hmm.
business mentor. He was 20 years my senior. He was also my business partner. And he was the one who encouraged me to take up golf, because he was talking about this. And I remember getting into it. And I'm not a very good golfer, first and foremost.
Me too.
But so the suppliers always won. So maybe that was a good deal for us,
Mhm.
But regardless, I realized how much alcohol was present in a lot of those spaces. But once I removed the alcohol, it didn't really matter. And I
Mhm.
actually found that a lot of the times when I would be out with others now, because I wasn't drinking, others wouldn't drink as well. And it wasn't my intention. Like I had no issue with that. But it was interesting, because I started to realize that I was the one that was dictating if other people were drinking. And I started to realize that about myself. I would often buy an extra round, and it was my way of giving myself permission to have another drink.
Mhm.
Like there was all these little tricks and hacks, but the energy piece was amazing. And I think that is the biggest one that people will take away. When you remove alcohol, your energy will instantly get better. It will get
Mhm.
better. And as you start to feel better, you start to think more clearly. And as you start to think more clearly, your perspective on not only yourself and the world around you will shift. And as long as the inputs you're feeding into your mind and the habits that you are doing are more orientated to being positive and growth orientated, watch out. That's all I can say, is just watch out, get out of your own way and just move. And you will be surprised at how empowering it can be when you've removed that little crutch from your life. And I'm not here to vilify alcohol or say give it up. Like I'm not that person. to each their own. I truly believe that.
Mm-hmm.
But if our heart of hearts and we're being really honest with ourselves and we're looking in the mirror and saying, okay, is there an imbalance with my consumption? You know, is this holding me back from achieving certain goals or milestones that I want to achieve? Be honest with yourself. If it is holding you back, well, maybe it's a matter of time of just taking a little bit of a pause, just a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of a break, just to make sure to test that theory, right? But you'll be surprised, you'll be really surprised. But last comment here was I realized my social network also changed a lot in that first year of no alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of my social connections were around drinking. And it only took me showing up a couple times as the sober version of me, not drinking. Guys, we get a couple rounds into it. Like we watch UFC as an example at the
Mm-hmm.
pub that we live by. And I'd start showing up, they get a couple rounds in and I realized, geez, there's no connection here.
Mm-hmm.
Like they want to talk surface stuff, really just, it was just, I was realizing how empty the conversations were.
Mm-hmm.
And here being sober and then this new sort of way of being, I was really hungry and craving deeper connection. And I realized that that wasn't going to happen in those circles. So I had to start changing my social connections, changing who I was hanging out with. Hard at first, but great afterwards, because it really supported me with the changes I wanted to make,
I really think it's a beautiful ripple effect that you just mentioned too, in the sense that you kind of took a second to question where you were coming from, and then ultimately, when you started to change your habits, you started to, see one of two things: either the habits of those closest around you change, and
Mm-hmm.
also, maybe some people, no shame to them, as you mentioned, to each their own.
Mm-hmm.
But you started hanging around with a social circle that was a little more compatible and accretive to your long-term ambition. So beautiful to see that. Similar note to that, as you mentioned earlier regarding vulnerability, why do you think that a lot of people, or a lot of men in particular, have trouble being vulnerable? And there's this kind of stigma that men shouldn't talk about their issues, or shouldn't talk about their issues with their fellow male friends.
Well, we have to just think about how do we all learn? And most of us learn through modeling and mentorship, usually both of those at the same time, right? Like we model certain habits and behaviors that we see or actions and hope to create similar results for ourselves. I mean, it's the quickest way that we learn, right? Is like I just look at the digital education space, right? Like, I mean, we're buying all these how-to courses, right? Like, show me how to do that. Well, what is that you're doing? Well, I've got a course on how to do what I did, and it's like, well, that's modeling as well as mentorship indirectly. And when I think about most men's relationships, at least, I'm talking about developed countries in particular here, like North America, especially, just because that's where I have the most amount of comfort and obviously real life experience is where I've lived and where I've been able to observe some of these things. Because I'm not here to say that this answer is 100% correct, but from what I've observed, the majority of men have been raised in a way that doesn't support or model how to express ourselves, at least from a more an emotional standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
At least that was my experience. Like I think back to my dad, and no knock to him, but his parents. I mean, he used to tell me, like, you can count on one hand how many times he remembered his parents saying "I love you" to him. He was born in 1944. Post-war baby boom. He was definitely part of that. But his parents were very stoic, very professional, very. They wouldn't express emotions. They would express anger. They could have a laugh occasionally, but those are really about the main emotions that they expressed on the regular. And so that was perpetuated. And I know that generation, this was very common. That's why we talk about the stigmatization or the cliche, and we laugh about it.
Mm-hmm.
We do. We laugh. We chuckle about it. It's like, oh, yeah. Those guys don't ever want to talk about what's going on in life, what's real for them. And it's like, yeah. But a lot of us that were the generation following that and the generation following us are dealing with the same things because we're perpetuating the same thing. And so I always like to start things with like just asking people, like, what does this idea of being vulnerable mean to you? And when I did a poll, this is before I did my TEDx talk. I wanted to survey a lot of my audience, specifically men and women, to get two different viewpoints on this. And what was interesting was a lot of the men expressed that they want to be able to express themselves better, but they just don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what to do or how to do it, but they're also afraid of how it might be received by other men. I know myself, I used to look at other men as competition. I would often be concerned if I was really truthful with them or I opened up with them, they might take what I'm sharing and use it against me.
Mm-hmm.
So there's already this underlying piece of just like, oh, a little bit of fear, a little bit of, I don't know if I can trust you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I found that it was actually just holding me back from connecting with these men. So creating a space that's safe to practice the skill of being vulnerable, because I truly believe it's a skill. And it's a skill any one of us can develop. But it's how do we find or create a space that's safe to practice that? Brene Brown's got some wonderful resources, especially on the professional side of things. Like if you're looking at how do we create more vulnerable or real authentic conversations in a business space. And this is often trying to navigate lots of different personalities. And that's where this bridge around vulnerability can sometimes be misaligned,
Mm-hmm.
and so how do we communicate that? How do we get on the same page so we can at least feel safe enough to explore some of the sensitive topics that we're feeling a little bit of emotion about? It's all there, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ability to do this is there, but we need to find good examples of it and then emulate that ourselves. And finding men's groups was really instrumental for me to
Mm-hmm.
gain some understanding around this. Also, I read a few really good books. One in particular is called The Way of the Superior Man. And I remember when I brought the book home, my wife's looking at it and goes, well, that's a chauvinistic title. And I'm like,
There we go.
well, it kind of is. But it's not what you think. It's really about this idea of helping men tap into what's driving them inside, better
Mm-hmm.
understanding the inner workings of being a man. But also explaining a lot of the dilemmas or cliches that many of us deal with. We hear about the midlife crisis, right? We joke about it. We laugh about it. I remember my dad going through it, in his 40s. He had the big comb over. He got himself a sports car. He separated and divorced my mom. It's like, hello, watched it happen. And yet we laugh about these things. We joke about it. And that's where these cliches and stigmas come around. So we have to challenge those two, right?
Mm-hmm.
People have to start stepping up and saying, no, let's redefine what this means. Let's redefine vulnerability. Let's redefine connection. Let's redefine what a man-to-man relationship can look like and
Mm-hmm.
not be afraid of that. I remember having guys and they didn't want to have deeper conversations because they were afraid that it would imply that maybe they were,
Less than.
well, yeah, and it's hard to say, right? Because I see that then perpetuated to their kids and see how they act. And it's like, wow, there it is. History repeats itself.
Mm-hmm.
And, but it's on us. And I have to commend you. You got a great podcast. And look, we're having a
Appreciate it.
conversation about this. There's conversations about this online happening all
Mm-hmm.
over the place. There's men's groups popping up to have conversations and help guys open up to this. There's so many great resources now.
Mm-hmm.
So even if there's people out there that are curious about this, I just say, go take a look, go do some exploring,
Mm-hmm.
and find what does it mean for you, because you have to do it in a way that you still maintain your safety. You have to
Mm-hmm.
feel safe, like just being vulnerable for the sake of being vulnerable to say, hey, look at me. Not the best motivations to be vulnerable,
So, say for example, if someone comes up to you,
Mm-hmm.
someone looking for guidance, a male or a man, for example, and he says, "I'm not worried about what people will think," and he
Mm-hmm.
goes to one of these groups to try to talk about vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
but he's still having struggle opening up. Is there any practical advice that you would give someone for them to improve when it comes to their vulnerability?
Yeah, rather than trying to unpack the past. And I do recommend, that's where it was very beneficial for me to work with a psychologist as an example. I have no problem sharing this now, but back in the day, I wouldn't share that I was seeing a psychologist. It was very
Mm-hmm.
much like if you ever watched The Sopranos, like I think it's hilarious, but the first couple seasons, they really hammer home the mental health conversation, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
stigmatization of these very male chauvinistic figures and their opinion of mental health advocacy, rather negative. And I mean, that's a blown out of proportion cliche, but there's a lot of truth to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of commonalities with how we've looked at mental health and mental health challenges and the support networks. Now, fortunately, we're 20 some odd years in the future now, and we are more open to the conversation. And I think as men, it's just looking for the right support networks
Mm-hmm.
to be able to start to tiptoe or dip our toes in the waters of exploring what is this idea of being vulnerable mean. And look at it, like setting up the expectations, I think is also very important because that gives us a little bit of security as well and knowing what to expect. Because what's one of our biggest fears? Well, it's the fear of the unknown, right? Like I remember guys showing up to men's groups. We had this 18-year-old show up one day and there's like 20 guys sitting around this table right before we start connecting. And he walks in the room and he's like, where am I? He's looking at all these guys looking back at him, and you can tell he's really intimidated. But for some reason, he showed up. And it's just a matter of us making him feel welcome and safe and sitting down. And one of the first questions I invite everybody to think about is what's alive and real for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a wonderful question just to even ask yourself or to ask another man in a conversation. Hey, man, what's alive and real for you right now? What are you working on? What are you doing? How are you feeling about that? Like just breaching the conversation about what's going on right now versus thinking about what's happened in the past. Because we can't change that. We can reframe it. We can try to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But truthfully, that action has already happened, right? That boat sailed a while ago. So let's talk about right now and moving forward. And so sometimes that's a little easier to start with because that's present in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Rather than trying to talk about things that have already happened. But as we start to get more comfortable, we might want to open up about some of those things that are constantly the anchors or those pieces that are holding us back psychologically, emotionally, physically, like spiritually even. We have lots of anchors that sort of hold us back from evolving into that person that maybe we want to be or the values we want to foster. And until we know what those are, it's really hard to untether ourselves from them. And but I'll be the first one to say, find professional support. I think it's wonderful now. It was instrumental. And again, I didn't go for years on end here. I want everyone to know that, but I did apply myself. I intentionally did a lot of work to figure out, why do I keep regressing back to alcohol? Why is it such a strong piece for me in my identity right now? Because I didn't want it, but yet it keeps showing up. Why is that? And here I am racking my brain. And that's where a professional was able to ask me the right questions and guide me down a path to discover that.
Got it.
Because once you know, you can't undo that.
Yep, for sure. So as complicated as it may sound, really it's being honest with yourself and thinking about what's holding you back. And then, as difficult emotionally as it may be, taking practical steps to recognize what those anchors are and then, thinking more practically about how to navigate them. And that's ultimately how we move forward.
It really does help. But finding a community of people that are like-minded, that are also wanting to explore this idea, can be really helpful. And there's men's groups all over the place, online, offline. I mean, they're everywhere now. There's really no excuse. And I know it can be really awkward going to your first few, but just go, even just to observe, to be present for it. Because I think you'll all of a sudden, as a man, again, who identifies as a man, who's participated in these both as a facilitator, but more often than not as a participant, it's amazing to see examples of other men being confidently open and with no fear of sharing who they are, what they're about, and what some of their belief systems are, but also what they're struggling with. Because that was the most instrumental thing for me, because as soon as guys started opening up about some of their challenges, I remember being at one meeting in particular, a guy opened up about just the struggle with alcohol. And I was like, man, me too. Like, he was sharing his story and I was like, that is my story. But until I started opening up about it and being vulnerable about my own past and some of the struggles I was dealing with, I would have never had the opportunity to connect with another guy that was also dealing with the same thing. Because how many times do we think that no one's going to understand me? No one's going to get the problems I'm dealing with. And it's really funny because there's lots of people out there that are probably dealing with similar things. But we got to open up and talk about it if we're going to figure out who's dealing with what. And that's, again, why I say these controlled environments is a wonderful place to explore that and start to develop that self-understanding, but also understanding of others,
I'm a big proponent of a lot of things that you just said, but especially community. There's actually been a thought or a belief that I recently been thinking about regarding just finances and life and happiness. So seemingly the most cliche topics that everyone is concerned with these days. But in my opinion, unprofessional opinion, I have to add, I think that above a certain resource amount, or let's just call it what it is, above a certain financial amount, I think people need a certain amount to feel comfortable, to not be as stressed. But I think to ultimately find happiness, what you really need is that community. I think, the difference between 2 cars and 10 cars isn't much. It's all fake. It's materialistic. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think money is still important and something that people should strive to reach a certain level of comfort. But when we think about kind of the happiness scale, from stressed out to super happy, it might maximum, if you're, a billionaire, it'll get you to the middle part of it. Because if you're, for example, a billionaire and, if you've been divorced 3 times, all your kids just kind of use you for your money, you might not have certain stresses, but you're never going to achieve that full happiness, as opposed to someone else who's, say, for example, a successful business person, but we'll just say isn't the level of some kind of billionaire, but has a great family, is happy, is really involved in his community. I think that person's going to be exponentially happier than someone who just kind of made it really financially and, for example, neglected their personal relationships. So, in short, I think financial resources and just resources in general will bring you up to a certain point regarding your happiness. But I think, high level beyond a certain point, it will make a difference. It's really the community that you have. So I really think it's a beautiful point that you put there, that we should all strive to kind of find that area of like-minded individuals, not perfectly similar. We all have our different backgrounds, but people with similar problems, people who, have seen life's issues in an area that we feel comfortable being vulnerable with, because I think ultimately that's what will make us happy in the long run. So definitely beautifully put on your end there, for sure.
Oh, thank you. And to echo what you just said there, because there's some wonderful research by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Dan Buettner, and he was a guy
name.
that Buttner. Do you familiar with him?
Oh,
The
no, no,
Blue
I was, I
Zones.
was, I was joking, Daniel Butner, but sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. The word DB, so yeah.
Daniel Buttner. It's like Buttner. So it's an interesting last name. I never know if I pronounce it the right way, but he was commissioned by National Geographic to research these areas called the Blue Zones. And there was 5 areas around the world where they had the most amount of people living to be 100 years or older. Now, this isn't what we think about typical 100-year-olds. Like, I think about 100-year-olds, and I think, man, they're sitting in a rocking chair waiting to die, right? Now, and I'm not trying to be facetious or condescending or mean, but that's a real belief. When I think back to my 90-something old grandmother before she passed, that's all she did. Like, she sat in a chair all day long, We'd have to bring her food and check in on her, but she just sat and wasn't very active because her body had degraded so much, right? And her mind. And so a lot of us have this sort of idea, this is what happens as we age. But here he found was there's these wonderful examples of these population densities that are thriving into their hundreds, like thriving, a lot of them living independently still. But when he looked at the 9 factors that were common between each of those 5 areas, money was not in there. It wasn't a money thing. There was nutrition, there was a quality of life, there was daily movement, but there was tremendous amount of weight put into this idea of meaning and purpose. Also, a spiritual connection, something greater than ourselves. But the biggest one was a tight bonds between family and a tribe, a community. Like, those are some of the biggest factors that contributed to those people's quality of life being very high, but also this longevity and health span component. And it's amazing, right? When you see that, it's like, well, yeah, money never came into it, but these people they're happy, they're ecstatic, they're having a great time. They're not billionaires, they're not even millionaires. But the money's not an issue. It's not the issue that's determining their level of happiness, So it's anyway. So I wanted to further validate what you were saying, because I think you're spot on with what you said.
Got it. I appreciate that. I'll have to look into his research. But on another note, regarding kind of vulnerability and happiness and managing the roller coaster that is life, and especially kind of the stuff that you've been through in your life, how would you say that you've been able to manage the ups and the downs, especially since making the big shift in your life?
Yeah, I think all of us have a natural ability to be resilient. I mean, it's in our DNA. Like, all of us, just as part of the human species is resilient, right? Like, look at it. Like, we're almost 8 billion people on this planet. That's pretty good resiliency, Like, we're probably, the climate change experts are like, yeah, we're too resilient, but that's regardless. Yeah, but we have an ability to overcome, to evolve, to deal with the suffering, to deal with hardship, to deal with just really uncomfortable situations, and yet get through them, and continue moving forward. Now, this is something that I believe is in all of us to some level, but to what level that is, do we acknowledge in ourselves? That remains to be debated. But I love to just think about some of the changes I've made and how it's allowed me to be more resilient in the face of challenges. So what I mean by that is, as you start to gain this inner trust, right? This inner confidence, if you will, that, yeah, I can do hard stuff. Yeah, this is challenging. Yes, this is like what I dealt with before, and I can do it again. Because change, there is a process, right? Now, sometimes we feel like we're being forced through a process of change, but a lot of the times, we have to take actions to start to see change through. And that's the empowering part, right? Because as soon as I start taking, it's like, well, if I go to the gym one time, I'm not going to be healthy and fit. I go twice, I'm still not going to be healthy and fit. But if I'm consistent and I'm frequent enough, and I go on a regular, maybe 3 times a week, well, wow, 3 months from now, I'll notice some significant changes. It's trusting that process, and that, yeah, we can be on that journey, and more importantly, feel in control. Because I think that's what we're all sort of looking for from that safety standpoint, to what you said earlier about the financial piece. Yeah, there's a certain safety. of having some finances, right? Like we live in a
Mhm.
financial economy, it's global. We need a bit of money to function, to eat, to have a
Mhm.
roof over our heads, right? Like, so I'm not here to vilify money. It's very, very important. So being financially responsible and sound and clear is valuable, but it's not everything, you
Mhm.
know? And so as we build out this belief in ourselves that we are resilient on the down days, because I still have down days. I do.
We all
I
do.
have my down days, but my down
Mhm.
days aren't a down week anymore. Okay. It's a
Mhm.
couple down days. Sometimes it might just be a down hour, but I'm able to, my mindset is at a place now that I'm able to bounce back out of that much more quickly than I would have before in the past. Also,
Mhm.
because I don't have habits like, oh God, it was a horrible day today. Sheesh, I can't wait till I get home to drink a bottle of wine. Forget about it,
Mhm.
and just start over again tomorrow. That's not part of my equation any longer, and so this resiliency is in all of us, but it's trusting that it's there when we need it.
Got it. So knowing that, knowing whether we might have an up or down hour or up or down, got, forbid, a week or whatever, knowing high level that we as humans are built to be resilient and through no matter what, naturally we're going to go through difficult circumstances. But what we can do or what's in our control is to really try to catch ourselves when we're in those circumstances and really try to flip the switch to come back on the up. Would you say that's more accurate?
I would, but it's also just having a reset for each of us. I
Mhm.
remember the old computer days. I remember the old like PC days. Control Alt Delete.
Yeah.
You'd
Simple
hit
time.
Control Alt Delete. It's a hard reset, right? And what's the Control Alt Delete? What's the hard reset that people have to get themselves from a place of not feeling good to a place of feeling better?
Mhm.
And for myself, it's really easy. It's like I know I need a good night's sleep, a healthy meal, maybe a nice walk outside while listening to a positive, TED talk, a podcast like yours, Daniel, like whatever, just injecting something positive into my mind while I'm doing something physical. I know if I do those things, boom, within a matter of hours, I feel better. I'm thinking more clearly, and I just feel more connected to my life again. So
Mhm.
it's a matter of figuring out what is that for you. I believe everyone can create a Control Alt Delete, that hard reset when we have those moments. And it doesn't have to be this laundry list of things that you have to prescribe and do every time. It's
Mhm.
just figuring out what are a couple things that allow you to go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that was a problem, but I'm feeling better. All right, let's keep going forward. Maybe we revisit that. We unpack the challenge that we were navigating or bumping our head up against. But seeing it from a clearer perspective is always going to be helpful. But sometimes you have to have that hard reset. So I
Mhm.
want to encourage people, figure out what is your hard reset. What is the thing that's going to allow you to bounce back and tap into that resiliency when you need it.
Yep. It's I'm laughing over here because I had that moment kind of this morning. Maybe
Oh.
not at such a drastic extent, but last night just was busy with some podcast stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Candidly, I have a ton of work to do regarding growing my thing, and
Mm.
trying to be as honest as I can, even though I'm on a live episode.
Yeah.
But essentially, got what I like to call a good 5 hours of sleep last night. So what I
Wow.
mean by good, I mean I slept 5 hours without waking up, so that's a good sign. But then again, not the most sustainable thing. So hopefully it'll
Mm.
be kind of longer tonight. But was able to get up in the morning, go to the gym, do my workout. When I
Nice.
got home, kind of finished putting together some of the things that I wanted us to talk about. But at around an hour and a half before the episode, I wouldn't say I was upset or kind of angry or anything. I was just tired. I was like, I am
Mm.
exhausted as hell. So something that I've been trying to do recently, kind of when I'm in that kind of situation, as you mentioned, that we all might have when we're going through kind of a
Mm-hmm.
difficulty or when we're upset or tired or whatever. And I have another note to add on that, but the point is, I'll just pause, take a 10-minute nap, and then try to get up.
Nice.
So candidly, today's was more like 20 or 30 minutes, which happens, but definitely can resonate with that. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and slightly on off topic, but an interesting thought or theory that I've had recently.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times when we're naturally tired, we might conflate that or confuse that with
Mm.
stress. Do you think
Mm.
that people often confuse the two and maybe separating the two and realizing that when we're tired, we shouldn't automatically get stressed, might benefit people?
The short answer is yeah, absolutely. Um, the cool part is we're living in a day and age where we can pretty much quantify anything nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And these wearable devices are rather remarkable in what they can tell us. But there's one metric in particular that I believe trumps all the other metrics, and that's one that's called heart rate variability.
Mm-hmm.
HRV is like a window into our nervous system. And heart rate variability. So if we look at our heart rates, we get the lub and the dub, and there's a bit of a variance in this sort of beating within our body. And this variance, that the greater variance or variability we have with our heart
Yep.
rate, the more resilient we are to dealing with stress, the better we are at managing stress and tough situations.
Mm-hmm.
And the poorer the HRV is usually a sign of chronic conditions at times. Like
Mm-hmm.
as an example, I have a chronic autoimmune condition, and when my symptoms are triggered and I'm in a low state where my immune system is heavily compromised, my HRV is almost non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I feel tired, I feel a bit anxious, I feel achy and inflamed, and I'm like, oh, my HRV is really low. Okay, this makes sense. I got something going on internally right now that's creating that imbalance with my nervous system. The cool part is as people gauge what their foundation or baseline is for their HRV, they can start to monitor. Like, you wake up one morning, you're like, whew, my HRV is super low. I'm feeling a bit stressed out. Like, maybe going for that super intense workout today isn't the best use of my time. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
today I'll do a cold plunge, or I'll go for a hot tub and a sauna and a steam, or
Mm-hmm.
go for a nice easy walk. Like, you can start to dictate how you plan to exert yourself based on where you at from a stress standpoint. But now you're basing your decisions on quantified data, not just on maybe this, maybe that.
Maybe
Like, I
that.
find most of us aren't too sure. To your case in point at the very beginning that you asked, like, it's, yes, you can get to a place where you really know yourself well. But if you're someone that thrives on 5 to 6 hours a night sleep,
Mm-hmm.
and that's your normal, well, for you, that might be absolutely fine. But to the next person, that might tank their HRV, right?
Yep.
But you've learned how to function correctly with it at that level. And
Relatively.
so everybody's different. And that's why I love that metric, is it's very biased to what's going on for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something I would encourage people, maybe do a little bit of due diligence, a little bit more searching on. I've got a lot of content on my website, some articles about HRV and how to implement and how to track it, even if you don't have an activity tracker. But I do believe that it's that nice one that when you get into it and you really understand it, you start to monitor that one metric, oof, you're going to feel way more empowered to making decisions on how you're going to exert yourself on the day to day, you
Got it.
know? Because
Totally.
if your
So.
HRV is low, and from a business case standpoint, don't have those hard conversations at work when HRV is low. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't do it. Move the call to the next day when your HRV is high, because your
Mm-hmm.
conversations will be more present, more engaging, and you'll also be more clear headed. And you'll find that those tough conversations that can usually be triggering, or sometimes, create some level of emotions. You don't want that emotion to trump your logic. HRV being in a high place is going to ensure that there's a better chance of that. Okay. And I can speak to this from personal experience. Just take it to heart. Okay.
Yeah, fair enough. So trying to make, professional or life decisions based off data, since, we live in this environment where everything's quantifiable. I definitely think that's awesome advice and something we should all definitely check out. Another thing that I wanted to return to, as you mentioned earlier, kind of your wife playing such an instrumental role in shaping and changing your life for the better. Something that you say that I think is really interesting. A lot of people say, oh, I've been married 10, 15, 20 years. You say, oh, I've been dating my wife for 23 years. So can you clarify what you mean by dating your wife?
Well, language is a big deal. I'm a big believer in that. I mean, I went to school for philosophy and English lit, even though I had a career in fitness and entrepreneurship. But that's what I went to school for, because it was the stuff I was interested in, even though there's really not much money in it. But I love the
But
subject matter, and it, for us, I mean, especially after that big change, going back roughly 13 years ago, to where she asked me that question that day. That question was really a turning point for us in our relationship, but also me as a human being in my development, because I was able to set some very clear intentions about what I wanted to move away from, but also more importantly, what I want to move closer to. And it was this vision of the kind of life that I wanted and the kind of person I wanted to be in that life. I had to get
mhm,
really clear on what is that. If we don't have clarity, it's really hard to figure out what we're doing next. But my wife, I gotta say, she is someone that's able to just be very poignant,
mhm,
right to the point, avoiding all the mix match and the jibber jabber, and you know what I mean by that, like all the fluff. Gets right to the point. And the point I'm trying to make by getting to the point is, it's the easiest way. I want to say this in a way that doesn't trigger anybody, but sometimes you just got to get out of your own way. All right. And especially when it comes to relationships, the way that we constantly look at relationships are usually heavily biased to just what we've observed and how we've been raised. Bringing intentionality back into our relationships, I think, is very important, especially the longer the relationship, the more intentionality we need to stay engaged in the relationship, to keep that relationship fresh, to keep discovering who is that person. Because I'll tell you right now, 23 years later, my wife, Christy, today is very different than the girl I met 23 years ago. If I didn't intentionally take time to create space for her and I to have that one-on-one time, that quality time, not quantity, but quality time to connect and date, rediscover who we are and who we're becoming, I'd be missing the opportunity to continuously fall in love with her again. And so that's my encouragement to everybody. It's like, don't think about just, you've been married for X amount of years. I mean, how long have you been dating your wife? How long have you been dating your husband? How long have you been dating your partner? Because that dating implies deep intention. And if you remember what it's like when you first start dating somebody, man, it's exciting. It's exciting. Why? Because you're constantly discovering something new. You have the exchange of energy. It's fun, but it can stay that way. Maybe not 100% exactly as it was on day one, because there's a certain level of comfort that we achieve over history, over time together. But I believe that intentionality around dating is something that we can all tap into. And it's been really instrumental for my wife and I. We have a non-negotiable every Saturday night, 5 hours. It's a block on both of our calendar. Neither of us can ever book anything else in that spot. It's our time for each other. And it's been like that for, 12, 13 years now, non-negotiable Saturday nights. To the point now, my friends and her friends, like if they ask us to do something on Saturday night, it has to be the two of us. So it can be like a double date in that, but they'll never ask us to do anything on our own. Because they already know it's like, nope, it's date night, right? And so I like to encourage anybody in a relationship, to just do that. Create a weekly, recurring, non-negotiable commitment for you and your partner to date. Constantly reconnect. And
I love
watch
that
out.
framing. Yeah, I love that framing of mind you put there. Instead of saying you're married, you're saying you're dating. Even though it's a simple, kind of practical, just word fix, it almost reframes how you're viewing a relationship. And I definitely think it's beautiful. And over time, as people get comfortable with each other, they're just more accustomed to each other's habits. But I do think if you think of it as I'm dating my wife of 25 years, there's always that kind of spark of excitement saying that word. So definitely agree with you on that. Another thing that you kind of pride your life by is living by the 5 Fs. So can you describe briefly what the five Fs are?
We all need values. Our values are what drive our subconscious. A lot of our belief systems are defended, and quite literally defended based on our values. Like we can get very strong. Like we can see when people have values triggered, they get pretty antagonistic, right? I mean, just look at the strife around the world today. I mean, there's some big examples of people where there's misaligned values on one side of the border versus the other side. And we have wars erupting based around these misaligned values. And I'm not trying to oversimplify it because obviously it's way more dynamic than that. But there's an underlying disconnect, right? And two very contrarian belief systems at work. But when we think about ourselves and how we navigate our own lives, often what we value is what will help shape our lives, give it direction, but also give it all the cool stuff that makes our lives amazing, or not. Because when we're doing things that aren't aligned with what's important to us, that's usually where challenges can start to happen. And I'll explain very quickly. My 5 Fs are just really simple way for me to identify my values, using a little alliteration, because when I published my book about 8 years ago, I wanted something that was easily memorable and rememberable, but also giving people an example of a framework that they too could potentially model for themselves. And so fitness, faith, family, finances, overarching roof of fun. Okay. And everything's on a foundation of health first. That'd be mental health, physical health, emotional health, financial health, like just holistic health. But fitness is a great conduit to improve our health. So what are we doing to be financially fit? What are we doing to be mentally fit? Like that intentional work to improve those areas. And so those 5 Fs are really just simple ways for me to filter through making decisions today. Like how many of us deal with FOMO, right? That fear of missing out. We get a great opportunity. Like I work as a professional speaker as well, but there was a period of time there where, being a speaker and that desire to want to impact an audience was very strong, and it still is strong in me. But if it was drawing me away from my family for prolonged periods of time, that created this negative feeling for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'd start to feel guilty about doing the work, and so it became easier for me because I said, no, I'm going to align my decisions and my choices professionally to align with my personal values. So all of a sudden I get these opportunities to speak and I'm like, no, it's going to take me away for a week from my family. That week I've got a real big family commitment. It's a no for me,
Got it.
because I don't want to misalign that. I want to respect and honor my values. And it makes life just a little bit easier to make some tough decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I encourage everybody. Just because I shared my 5 values doesn't mean it's the same for you. Those
Mm-hmm.
that are listening to this or watching, but going through an exercise to figure out what is those values, what are they, is very, very important. And I mean, if you go to Brene Brown's website, I mean, there's so many websites that have exercises on how to get clear on your values. I would encourage anybody and everyone, it's an exercise worth taking, taking the time to do it and figure it out.
Yep, for sure. I agree
Yeah.
with you 100% on that because one thing that I never compromise on, kind of even though I'm in just the startup of startup or I'd consider myself a little bit more veteran of a seasoned speaker at this point regarding the podcast, but health is one of
Mm-hmm.
those things that I'll never
Mm.
compromise on. Some days I might have a lot more work, maybe I'll do a little bit less of a workout, but I think, as I've gotten older and as I've seen some unfortunate health situations, that's something that I'll always make sure I have time for. So I
Beautiful.
definitely agree with you on there. And speaking of actually health, you've done a lot of really cool stuff in the wellness space. If you didn't work in wellness or kind of the industry that you're working in now, what other job do you think you would have?
I love, well, I guess this kind of is still in wellness, but I love CrossFit, like coaching, like personal
Mhm.
training and just helping people with fitness, period. But I guess that's still in the health space, but it's just very different than what I've done. Ran a retail company, for almost 2 decades. There wasn't a lot of one-to-one coaching or personal training for that matter. So that's always been sort of a passion. I enjoy that. But I also love like retreats and that kind of thing, like
Mhm.
event planning or creating experiences, I think is probably the better way to describe that. Like curating experiences for people, like community experiences. I really enjoy that. So I think I would probably do something more intentionally in that sort of realm. Um, I don't know what it would look like, but I know it'd just be about bringing like-minded people together to experience something awesome, something
Okay.
life-changing. And what that looks like, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it, but I know that that's something that I feel drawn to.
Okay. That's also fair.
Yeah.
And on that note, what do you think your life's mission is?
Well, quite frankly, it's to inspire, motivate, and educate people in a fun way to live their
Hmm.
best lives. And I realize it's a little cryptic there. What does best life mean? Well, to each their own. They have to take
Exactly.
the time to define what is that, to
Hmm.
align what's important. And so my big mission is to try to provide people with the resources and the direction to figure that out. Because it's amazing once you figure it out. It is just a matter of being consistent and moving every day in that same direction. And trust me, it
Hmm.
doesn't matter how far or how close you get to the end result. The fact that you're just progressing every day towards it, that's enough. It's enough, man. It's enough to feel fulfilled, to feel happy, to feel joyful about our purposeful, intentional living towards an end goal or an outcome of a place that we want to end up. And it's a very wonderful feeling when you have that clarity of direction, And so, yeah, that would be my mission right now.
I'd say I'm a big clarity of direction fan and think I found mine, but I agree that you just got to show up every day and keep moving forward. Who would you say in your life has been a big role model to you?
Well, professionally speaking, my last career, with my last company, my business partner was a big mentor of mine, professional mentor. He was 20 years my senior, and I met him in my early 20s. He would have been in his early 40s, so a few years younger than I am now when I met him. And I just remember being really wowed by his life and his life story and also what he had created. He had a previous company, 2 previous companies before we connected. And I met him in the second company that he was a co-founder of, and just we fostered this relationship because he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself.
Hmm.
But he knew that I was hungry. I wanted to develop myself professionally. I wanted to be successful, in whatever endeavor I did, and he saw that. And I think that's the cool thing about a mentor-mentee relationship. Mentors often see something in the mentee that the mentee maybe hasn't noticed in themselves or aren't
Hmm.
even aware that they have that skill set or way of being, right? And he was instrumental in really fostering that in me and giving me the confidence to actually end up where I am today, So,
Hmm.
and then outside of that, my parents, especially my mom, she always had a side hustle. She was an RN, a registered nurse, but my entire life growing up as a kid at home, she always had something going on the side, always,
Mhm.
like always. And so it was awesome growing up with that, because it just reminded me this work ethic, but also the fact that you never settle, right? And you want to chase your passions outside of whatever your career might be. There is always that option. And
Mhm.
so that was a wonderful example to grow up with as well.
Got it. I think it's awesome, and role models are also great. And no worries, we love pets here, so appreciate the appreciate the pet there.
Yeah.
But on the note of mentorship,
Mhm.
if you say, for example, had a choice where you could get dinner with anybody, dead or alive in history, do you know
Mhm.
who your dream dinner guest would be?
Yeah, I think Gandhi and Einstein would be pretty cool.
Mhm.
Like imagine sitting around a table with those two guys. I mean, it would be just so interesting, right? Like,
Mhm.
and even the Dalai Lama. Like I think that just, I mean, two of which are very spiritual, but also, I mean, literally
Intellectual,
changed the trajectory. Like not so much like Dalai Lama, sure, but Gandhi and Einstein in particular, they were integral in shifting history.
hmm,
Like really. And I just think it would be a fascinating conversation just to hear them recount some of those big life experiences that they've had. I mean, just how cool would that be? Mhm.
for sure,
Yeah,
definitely. And two other quick things I wanted to touch upon.
yeah.
You've done a lot of really cool and awesome things in your life, and are on a mission to impact over 1 million people and help them become role models in their own rights. How would you say that you find happiness in your life?
Well, the thing is happiness is sort of the experience or the emotion I get when I do certain things. So recognizing the things that bring happiness into my life and doing more of those things has been the big part of it. And the values definitely help with that. Like when I'm honoring my health, I'm happy. I'm
Hmm.
honoring my family, I'm happy. Like when I'm honoring I guess my desire for professional development, like when I'm honoring my audiences, when I'm honoring the things that I do professionally to derive an income, but also to make an impact, when I'm doing those things that are aligned with those values, again, I feel happy. And it's recognizing there's certain things that elicit that emotion in me, that create more of it for me, and
Hmm.
doing more of those things and less of the things that don't make me happy. So I think it's really understanding myself and understanding the things that create that fulfillment, joy, and happiness for myself, because we all are trying to live our best lives, right? We're trying to follow
Hmm.
our own hero's journey, and during that journey we're going to meet some amazing people that shift our trajectory of that life travel. But the cool part, there's one person that's on that journey with us every step of the way, and that's ourselves.
Hmm.
And so that idea of know thyself, it's like a cliche. We laugh about it, right? But man, it's true, right? Like get clear on who we are. What are we about? What really matters to us as individuals? Because the clearer we are on that, the less challenging it is, I think, to create opportunities to experience more happiness in life.
Yep. I hope this isn't a cliche, and a pun intended, I guess, if it is, but I think cliches are cliches for a reason. So
Yeah.
if instead of getting bored of them all the time, and hopefully we don't see them all the time, but we learn to embrace them, I
Yeah.
definitely think the world opens up much more. But on a parting note, Di, is there anything else that you think everybody should know, or anything else that you want everyone to know?
Listen, change, it's hard. Okay. It is. I know it's really hard. But there's this dude like named Buddha, like over I don't know, it's got to be close to 2,500 years ago. He said, "Hey, hey, 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 everybody, guess what? Guess what? Guess what? There's one thing that we know is absolutely 100% true. Nothing stays as it is." He stated that this universe of ours, this life that we'll know, is impermanent. Nothing stays the same. And when you really warm up to that idea and recognize that change is happening, whether you like it or not, it doesn't feel so daunting. In
Hmm.
fact, you can start to look at change a little bit differently. In particular, like be more proactive in the change that comes to your life, accepting it more so you can also play a role in the change that you're experiencing. Because there's nothing worse than feeling like it's happening and we got no control over it, and we feel like a victim of change. And I really want to encourage people, listen, you can be the champion of change for yourself. It might not always be the easiest of things to do, because I understand there's hard changes that happen. I've lost a family member instantly before, and that was hard. It was a change I did not want. It's
Hmm.
not like I accept it willingly, like, oh, well, that's fine. It's great. Change happens. I'm not that naive, but recognizing that those things do happen. So it reminds me to be more present in the moment and in my life right now, and
Hmm.
not take things for granted. And I think that idea of our relationship with change is something I'd like to encourage everyone. Just get more in touch with that and your feelings around change, because it's that change piece that definitely affects us mentally and emotionally and spiritually, very,
Mhm.
very much so in our lives. So why put it off, right? Like, just start figuring it out. Start warming up your relationship with change and recognizing that, hey, not only is change possible, but often it happens when you decide for it to happen.
Yep, I think a change is the only constant is a beautiful parting note. And Dai, thanks so much for an awesome guesting, and thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Daniel, and honored to be here. And thank you again for creating a platform to capture these conversations. I just think it's a wonderful contribution to the world, and I was just honored to be here today. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Dai Manuel. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.